In a city where survival is a daily ritual and legends are born from pain, hope flickers on forgotten corners. This isn't just a story about the streets, it's about the fight to change them, from the inside out. The heart of Alabama lies a city shadowed by struggle, a place where survival is not a choice, but a daily instinct. Birmingham, a name that once echoed with the rhythm of the civil rights movement, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. penned his letter from a jail cell, where children marched through fire hoses and police dogs to demand dignity. The same streets that witnessed America's moral awakening now, in some corners, beat to the pulse of chaos, resilience, and quiet war. This is the Magic City, once called that for its rapid industrial rise, its steel mills that forged the backbone of a nation. But the magic has dimmed in certain neighborhoods, replaced by a different kind of alchemy, the transformation of hope into desperation, of dreams into survival strategies. Here, in the trenches of the city, life moves to a different tempo. The streets don't whisper, they scream. Concrete carries stories written in blood and echoes of shattered childhoods. Historic avenues that once bustled with prosperity now bear witness to a different kind of history. One measured not in decades, but in heartbeats, in split-second decisions that determine who walks home and who doesn't. It's not just crime statistics, though Birmingham consistently ranks among America's most dangerous cities, with homicide rates that dwarf the national average. It's the way a generation has learned to breathe in a battlefield and call it home. It's the mathematics of loss. 144 homicides in a year in a city of barely 200,000 souls. Numbers that represent mothers, sons, dreams deferred permanently. Every block tells a story. Some tell of dreams unfulfilled, of young men who once imagined themselves as athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, reduced to calculating which corner is safe to stand on. Others speak of the razor-thin line between being hunted and being the hunter, where the difference between victim and perpetrator can shift in the span of a single moment. The neighborhoods most affected, places like Fairfield, East Birmingham, and parts of the South Side, weren't always war zones. These were once thriving working-class communities, home to steel workers and their families. But when the mills closed, when jobs vanished, when resources dried up, something else filled the vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so do desperate circumstances. In these neighborhoods, trust is a currency too expensive to afford. A glance can be a threat, a wrong turn, a final one. Children learn early to read the language of danger, the way someone walks, the position of their hands, the look in their eyes. It's a literacy of survival that no child should have to master. Some young men wear scars like armor, etched into their skin, carried in their eyes. They've seen what no one should, felt the heat of a barrel, watched friends fall in silence. They speak of violence with a casualness that chills, not because they're monsters, but because trauma has taught them that numbness is protection. And yet, numbness becomes normal. Violence, routine, the adrenaline, addicting. There's a perverse psychology at work here. When your environment is unpredictable and dangerous, control becomes paramount. If you can't control whether violence will find you, you might try to control when and how it happens. If you can't guarantee safety, you might settle for the illusion of power. It's not rational, it's deeply human. There are no fairy tales here, only survival stories, half-written, sometimes ended in a flash. Young men speak of death not as a distant possibility, but as an intimate companion, someone they've grown accustomed to seeing around the neighborhood. They develop relationships with mortality that most people never have to contemplate. The police are no saviors in this story. In some lives, they are the architects of pause, of prison, of pressure. Birmingham's police department, like many urban forces, operates in communities where they're seen more as an occupying force than as protectors. Decades of aggressive policing, of stops and searches, of lives interrupted by the justice system, have created a complex relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. For others, they're just another force to navigate around, another threat, not a shield. In neighborhoods where calling the police might bring more problems than solutions, where cooperation with law enforcement can mark you as a target, justice becomes a private matter, settled on personal terms. These are neighborhoods where a mother learns to mourn before she celebrates, where baby showers double as memorial planning, where graduation photos are taken with the desperate hope they won't become obituary pictures, where a child learns to run before he speaks, not toward playgrounds but away from gunfire. Compassion is dangerous, because kindness can be mistaken for weakness, and weakness can cost you your life. The cruel mathematics of street life dictate that showing mercy might be interpreted as vulnerability, and vulnerability becomes an invitation for exploitation. And yet, amidst the heartbreak, there is truth. Harsh, unfiltered truth that makes comfortable America uncomfortable. People don't just wake up violent, they are born into conditions that force hard choices. Poverty that spans generations, where a family's greatest inheritance is debt and desperation. Systemic neglect that has left entire communities without adequate schools, healthcare, or economic opportunity. Broken education systems where underfunded schools become babysitting facilities rather than launching pads for dreams, where teachers, fighting their own battles with inadequate resources, watch bright children dim under the weight of circumstances beyond their control. Fractured homes, not by choice but by design. Mass incarceration that has removed fathers, brothers, uncles from communities, leaving behind single mothers trying to raise boys into men without masculine guidance. The war on drugs that criminalize poverty and addiction rather than treating them as public health issues. And a society that watches from a distance, then labels from behind screens. Social media has created a voyeuristic relationship with urban trauma, where violence becomes entertainment, where real pain gets packaged as content, where human suffering becomes viral videos. 12 people dead in 1 week, not headlines, lives, futures erased. Marcus, 19, who was saving money for trade school. Tamika, 16, caught in crossfire walking to the corner store. Deshaun, 24, a father of 2 who was trying to leave the streets behind. Each number represents ripples of grief that spread through families, friendships, communities. The trauma compounds. Every shooting affects not just the victim but witnesses, families, entire blocks. Children develop PTSD symptoms that go undiagnosed and untreated. Mothers develop anxiety disorders from constant hypervigilance. Communities become collective trauma sites where healing feels impossible because the wounds keep reopening. But even in this darkness, some still hope. Some still fight to flip the narrative. Community organizers who refuse to give up on their neighborhoods. Mothers who march for peace even after burying their own children. Pastors who keep their doors open in communities where everything else seems to close. Former gang members who spend their time trying to prevent the next generation from making their mistakes. Programs like Operation New Birmingham, where former enemies work together to mediate conflicts before they escalate. Grassroots organizations that provide alternatives to street life, job training, mentorship, safe spaces where young people can be children instead of soldiers. Because no one chooses the trenches. The trenches choose them. Children born into zip codes that predetermine their life expectancy, their educational opportunities, their economic prospects. The American dream feels like a cruel joke when your reality is dodging bullets on the way to school. And the question isn't why people become a product of their environment, but rather, how many ever escape it? What does it take to break generational cycles of trauma and violence? How do you heal communities when the wounds are constantly reopened? The answer lies not in judgment from the outside, but in understanding from within. In recognizing that behind every statistic is a human story, behind every act of violence is a history of pain, behind every tragedy is a community that has been struggling to heal itself for generations. Birmingham's story is America's story. The consequence of promises broken, opportunities denied, and human potential wasted. But it's also a story of resilience, of people who continue to love, to hope, to fight for better, even when better seems impossible. In the trenches, survival is victory, but somewhere beyond survival lies the possibility of something more. If the rest of us are willing to stop watching and start helping, stop judging and start understanding, stop treating symptoms and start addressing causes. The Steel City was built by people who believed in transformation. Perhaps it's time to believe in it again. This is Alabama, a state that consistently ranks among America's most violent, alongside Mississippi, in a grim competition no community wants to win. Here, in cities like Birmingham and Mobile, the statistics aren't just numbers on a government report. They're neighbors. They're sons. They're the kid who used to ride his bike past your house every morning. The weapon recovered looks military grade, designed for battlefields, not neighborhoods. Yet here it is, another tool in an arsenal that has transformed American streets into war zones. The question haunts, does such firepower belong in our communities? The answer seems obvious, yet the weapons keep flowing, the violence keeps escalating, and the headlines keep coming. In the projects of Mobile, where concrete towers cast long shadows over dreams deferred, young men navigate a labyrinth of loyalty and survival. These are the hardest blocks, a designation earned through blood, measured in funerals attended before the age of 20. Here, territoriality isn't about property values or school districts. It's about which corner you can stand on without becoming a target. The unwritten rules are carved in tragedy: walk uninvited through the wrong neighborhood, and you might not walk out. It's not personal, it's systematic. A structure of survival that has calcified into something resembling order, but built on a foundation of chaos. Protection is offered to those who belong, but belonging comes with a price that compounds daily. The culture of violence has become so normalized that death is discussed with a casualness that chills the soul. 11 people killed on a single block, grandmothers, mothers, babies, each life reduced to a statistic in a ledger of loss that grows thicker every season. The survivors speak of murder with the same tone others might discuss the weather, not because they're heartless, but because trauma has taught them that numbness is armor. What's perhaps most disturbing is how entertainment this violence has become. Social media has transformed real suffering into content, where murder videos circulate like movie trailers, where real death becomes viral entertainment. Young people consume this violence through their screens, becoming desensitized to something that should never feel normal. The influence of drill music, a genre born from the streets reflecting the harsh realities of urban warfare, has become both mirror and magnifier of this culture. Artists rap about their lived experiences, painting lyrical pictures of a world where automatic weapons are accessories and body counts are badges of honor. But the line between art and incitement blurs when children as young as 12 begin dropping gang symbols and threatening rivals mimicking their musical heroes. These artists face an impossible paradox. They're criticized for glorifying violence, yet they're simply documenting their reality. They didn't create the conditions they rap about: poverty, systemic neglect, generational trauma, the absence of legitimate economic opportunity. They're products of environments where the fastest path to respect, money, and survival often runs through the barrel of a gun. The younger generation absorbs these messages like gospel. Children who should be worried about homework are instead learning the hierarchies of street organizations, adopting the language of warfare, preparing for conflicts they didn't start but feel compelled to finish. They see older peers with money, respect, and power, even if temporary, and they want that same status, that same protection, that same identity. But the cost is generational. Parents watch helplessly as their children are pulled into gravitational fields of violence they feel powerless to counteract. Mothers who work multiple jobs to keep food on the table come home to find their sons speaking in codes they don't understand, wearing symbols that mark them as targets, embracing identities that could lead to early graves. These aren't bad parents, they're overwhelmed parents, under-resourced parents, parents fighting systems designed to fail their children. They recognize the danger, understand the stakes, but feel equipped with inadequate tools to compete against an entire culture that glorifies what destroys. The teenagers caught in this cycle speak with startling honesty about their circumstances. They know the path they're on leads nowhere good. They understand their parents' fears, recognize the pain they're causing, acknowledge the risks they're taking, yet they feel trapped by circumstances, loyalty, and a lack of viable alternatives. When a 14-year-old gets shot and returns to the streets rather than retreating to safety, it reveals something profound about the psychological imprisonment of this lifestyle. The shooting doesn't serve as a wake-up call, it becomes confirmation of the worldview that violence is inevitable, that safety is temporary, that the only choice is between being predator or prey. The weaponry has evolved faster than the wisdom to contain it. Switches that convert legal firearms into fully automatic killing machines circulate through these communities like contraband candy. Young people speak casually about modifications that would terrify military personnel, treating instruments of mass destruction as natural extensions of their bodies. The territorial nature of this violence has created invisible boundaries throughout cities, dividing communities into armed camps where crossing the wrong street at the wrong time can be fatal. These aren't ancient ethnic conflicts or religious wars. These are neighbors fighting neighbors over corners that don't belong to any of them, defending territories that generate no real wealth, fighting for respect that's measured in fear. What's lost in the headlines and the music and the social media spectacle are the human moments. The parents who lie awake listening for gunshots, trying to distinguish between fireworks and firearms. The siblings who take different routes to school to avoid walking through enemy territory. The grandmothers who've attended more funerals than graduations, who've buried more children than they've celebrated. The economic reality underlying this violence is stark. Legitimate opportunities are scarce, while illegal ones appear lucrative. When the choice is between minimum wage at a job that barely covers survival or quick money that comes with quick dangers, the mathematics of desperation make the decision seem obvious. The tragedy is that both paths often lead to the same destination: early death or long imprisonment. Yet even in this darkness, moments of clarity pierce through. Young fathers who recognize they need to break the cycle for their children. Veterans of street life who understand that the game they've been playing has no winners, only survivors and casualties. The recognition that the enemy isn't the kid from the next block, it's the system that pitted them against each other in the first place. The solution isn't simple because the problem isn't simple. It's generational trauma meeting systemic neglect, individual choices intersecting with structural limitations, cultural expressions amplifying destructive patterns. It's young people with adult responsibilities making life and death decisions with adolescent brains, in environments where wrong choices are often the only choices available. Path forward requires acknowledging that these communities aren't inherently violent, they're responding to violent conditions, that these young people aren't inherently criminal, they're surviving in systems that criminalize poverty and desperation, that the music isn't creating the violence, it's reflecting violence that was already there, violence that has roots deeper than any song. Real change would require addressing root causes, creating legitimate economic opportunities, investing in education and mental health services, providing alternatives to street culture that offer the same sense of belonging and purpose. It would require treating addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal justice problem, addressing trauma rather than just punishing its symptoms. But until then, the headlines will keep coming, the manhunts will continue, the weapons will keep flowing into communities already drowning in their destructive power, and young people will keep making impossible choices in impossible circumstances, while the rest of America watches from a distance, judging outcomes without understanding origins. In Alabama's streets, survival has become an art form, violence a language, and death a frequent visitor. The question isn't why this is happening. The question is whether the rest of us care enough to help change it, or whether we'll continue consuming the tragedy as entertainment while the casualties mount. The weight of the streets isn't just carried by those who walk them, it's carried by all of us because these are our communities, our children, our future, and until we all own the problem, none of us can solve it. This is Wilson Park, a neighborhood where survival is measured not in years but in heartbeats, where young men speak of millions while dodging bullets, where hope and hopelessness exist in the same breath. Here, in these forgotten corners of America, the mathematics of survival create impossible equations. A father plans his escape from the very streets that raised him, knowing that by the time freedom comes, his son might already be lost to the same cycle that trapped him. It's a race against time, against circumstance, against a system that seems designed to consume its own children. The stories here begin with tragedy and end with more tragedy, but somewhere in between, there are moments that reveal the complex humanity of those society has written off. A dispute over a weapon, something as simple as someone trying to disarm another, escalates into violence that leaves one person shot 15 times. In most neighborhoods this would be unthinkable. Here, it's Tuesday. But what emerges from these harsh realities is a philosophy of survival that challenges conventional morality. The residents speak of murderers as good people, not out of callousness, but from an understanding that in their world, violence isn't always a choice, it's sometimes the only response to impossible circumstances. This isn't moral relativism born from ignorance, it's pragmatic ethics forged in environments where traditional concepts of right and wrong become luxury items most can't afford. When someone threatens your family, when the police are either absent or adversarial, when the legal system feels like another trap rather than protection, people develop their own codes of justice. The young men here possess a sophisticated understanding of human nature that would impress philosophers. They recognize that everyone has multiple sides, that the same person who might kill to protect their family could also open doors for strangers, show kindness to children, care for elderly neighbors. They understand that good and evil aren't fixed categories but fluid states that shift depending on circumstances. They speak of walking past murderers without knowing it, of people who appear gentle but carry deadly capabilities. It's a worldview born from necessity, one that recognizes the potential for violence in everyone, while still maintaining belief in fundamental human goodness. In their experience, the capacity for both love and destruction often exists within the same person. The logic is stark but undeniable. People don't commit murder for nothing. There's always a reason, always a trigger, always a line that got crossed. It might not be a reason the broader society accepts, but within the context of these streets, within the framework of survival where they operate, the reasoning follows its own internal logic. This understanding extends to their view of themselves. They don't see themselves as monsters or sociopaths. They see themselves as good people who've been pushed into circumstances that require terrible choices. When someone threatens what you love most, when conventional justice fails, when survival is at stake, the calculation changes. The weapons they speak of casually, Glocks modified with switches that convert them to fully automatic, choppers that can cut down multiple targets, aren't seen as instruments of evil, but as tools of necessity. In their world, being outgunned means being dead, and being dead means your family is unprotected, your children are orphaned, your community loses another defender. Yet amid this acceptance of violence as tool and trade, there's also a recognition of its futility. They understand that running from the hood is often pointless. The streets have long arms, and past conflicts follow you wherever you go. They know that getting caught up in criminal enterprises often leads to 12 or 13-year prison sentences, that the fast money comes with fast consequences. But they also dream. In 5 years they envision themselves wealthy, free from the constraints that currently bind them. They speak of having a couple M's, millions, with the same confidence others might discuss weekend plans. It's not delusion. It's the kind of faith required to survive in circumstances that would crush hope in most people. Their path to wealth isn't through traditional means, college, career advancement, careful investment. It's through understanding fear as currency, through mastering the psychology of intimidation, through building reputation as protection. They plan to be rich not despite their dangerous lifestyle, but because of it. There's a wisdom in their awareness of how precarious their situation is. They understand that many of their peers are wasting their lives, falling for distractions, women, temporary pleasures, short-term gratification, instead of focusing on long-term survival and success. They position themselves as more strategic, more focused, more likely to still be standing when the dust settles. This isn't the bravado of youth who think they're invincible. It's the calculated confidence of people who've seen enough death to understand its reality, who've witnessed enough failure to recognize what success requires in their environment. They move with purpose because they understand that aimless movement in their world leads to early graves. The tragedy isn't that they're making these calculations, it's that they have to. In a functioning society, 18-year-olds should be worried about college applications, not avoiding assassination attempts. They should be planning careers, not calculating which weapons modifications provide the best tactical advantage. Yet within these constraints, they're creating their own version of the American dream. If legitimate paths to wealth and respect are blocked, they'll create illegitimate ones. If society won't provide protection, they'll provide it for themselves. If the system won't give them opportunities, they'll make their own opportunities regardless of legality. The community understands this logic because it's lived this reality. When someone speaks of being wealthy in 2 years through methods that most would consider criminal, the response isn't moral outrage, it's practical assessment. Can he really pull it off? Does he have the intelligence, the connections, the ruthlessness required? Has he thought through the risks? Because in Pritchard, success is measured differently. It's not about moral purity, it's about results. It's not about following rules that were never designed to help people like them. It's about achieving outcomes that ensure survival and prosperity for themselves and their families. The weapons, the violence, the criminal enterprises, these aren't choices made in a vacuum. They're responses to conditions that were created by decades of disinvestment, systemic racism, economic abandonment, and social neglect. When legitimate systems fail communities, illegitimate systems fill the vacuum. The young men here aren't asking for moral approval from the outside world. They're not seeking validation from people who've never faced their choices. They're simply navigating their reality with whatever tools are available, playing the hand they were dealt with, whatever skills they've developed. Their dreams of wealth aren't abstract fantasies. They're concrete goals with specific timelines and strategic approaches. They may not be legal approaches, but they're approaches nonetheless. In environments where legal approaches have historically failed, illegal ones begin to look rational. The heartbreak isn't that they're wrong about society failing them, it's that they're right. The tragedy isn't that they're choosing violence. It's that violence chose them first, through neglect, through abandonment, through systems that treated them as disposable from birth. In Pritchard, the American dream hasn't died, it's simply adapted. It's taken the shape of its environment, adopted the methods available, embraced the logic of survival over the luxury of morality. Whether it leads to wealth or prison, success or destruction, remains to be seen. Among cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights there are voices, young, hardened, still hopeful, speaking of legacy. For many here the streets weren't a choice, they were the only path laid out. But even in that path, a vision flickers, to leave something behind. Something permanent, a car wash, a school, a business not born from fear but from purpose. But nothing here comes clean. Not the money, not the hands, not the past. Every dream drags a trail of grit behind it because rising from the streets means learning to wash the blood off ambition. In places like this, business isn't taught in classrooms. It's learned through tension, through movement, through survival. Every entrepreneur in the trenches had to first be a soldier. Before the suit and tie, came the scars and street codes. And even when peace is spoken, it's rarely trusted because the past doesn't forget. They say it's quiet now, no violence, no noise, just uneasy calm, but calm is fragile here. The silence is not peace, it's a pause before the sirens. Trucks riddled with bullets, streets sealed by SWAT, sirens scream louder than the children playing. This isn't fiction, this is Mobile, Alabama. Friday night was supposed to be for football, for families, for community, but violence doesn't check schedules. Shots rang out near the stadium ramp, not in the stands, not on the field, but close enough to shatter the illusion of safety. 4 wounded, 2 of them barely teenagers, 1 fighting for life. Fear of looking soft, the fear of being the first to fall if you let your guard down. In this world, extending a hand isn't always bravery. Sometimes it's a death wish, because the one who calls for peace might be the one holding a blade behind their back. Still, buried beneath the bravado there is something else, a flicker, a hesitation, a quiet longing for something different, not necessarily out of fear, but out of exhaustion, out of knowing that cycles don't break themselves. Maybe there's a future where the hustle looks different, where empires are built without loss, but for now, the street holds its own rhythm, and in the eyes of those raised within it, that rhythm is hard to silence, a word thrown around like a coin on cracked pavement. Everyone wants it. But in the streets, it comes at a price. Some say the other side will fold first, that eventually they'll wave the white flag. But not here. Not now. Not after what's already been done. Because some things, you don't come back from. When bullets tear past a birthday cake meant for a 4-year-old girl, what truce is left to offer? What peace can be made when innocence itself has been marked? Why would someone shoot at your house, someone once asked? The answer? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Sometimes, it's not about who did what, it's about what people think you did. And in these streets, rumors are just as deadly as facts. Violence here doesn't wait for reason. It's a reaction, a pattern, a reflex. One misstep, one misword, and lives unravel. One young man remembers the night his world flipped, a murder charge, a name added to paperwork that didn't belong to him. I didn't do it, he told them. Check ESPN, I was just playing in a game. Ask my coach. But the cuffs still clicked. The cell door still closed, and the night dragged on, cold and uncertain. He waited, held on to hope. Free corn, he'd say. Free my brothers. Because behind bars or in the streets, the brotherhood doesn't end. It just shifts. Is it safe here? That's a question with no fixed answer. Right now? Maybe. But anything could change. In an instant. In a heartbeat. This life doesn't offer guarantees. And the violence? It's not rare. It's routine. Not a special occasion, but the rhythm of the night. Bloodshed, retaliation, broken mothers. Does anyone feel empathy for the other side? Sometimes. Maybe. But compassion is a currency that doesn't hold its value here. If they wouldn't spare me in court, why should I spare them in grief? One voice says. It's a cold calculation. But in places where justice is selective, mercy becomes optional. And when the laughter returns after a body falls, when death becomes a meme, a punchline, it's hard to hold on to humanity. The pain is real, but the armor gets thicker. Still, some confessions bleed through. I loved y'all. Why did y'all do that to us? Words whispered like prayers never meant to be answered. Love and war, side by side in the same breath. Once there was a dream, a ball spiraling through autumn air, a touchdown, a stadium roaring. But now football is a wound. a reminder of a path lost. He doesn't want to talk about it, not anymore, because remembering hurts more than forgetting. And when did the door finally open? When did freedom return? Only a few months ago. But after everything, even freedom feels unfamiliar. Because in places like this, the bars aren't just on the windows, they're in the mind, in the memories, and the past doesn't let go easy. Sometimes life takes everything from you before you even understand what it means to have something. There was a young man. His life paused, not by his own doing, but by the weight of a justice system that saw him as a threat before it saw him as a human. For years, his world was frozen. Papers were filed, motions were ignored. His phone, his freedom, his future, taken. And when it was all over, when the charges were dropped, nothing was returned but silence. He walked out, not as the same person, but as someone forced to carry years of injustice like bricks in his chest. Time lost. Trust shattered. A life held hostage for something he didn't do. In the streets, grief is a constant echo. He watched people he loved get swallowed by violence, friends murdered in the most senseless ways, innocent lives erased in front of him, the kind of pain that doesn't fade, the kind that hardens the soul. At 15, he witnessed death too many times to count. The trauma carved deep into his memory, the faces of the fallen never leaving his mind. And when the weight became too heavy, he turned to anything that dulled the sharp edge of memory. Pills, distractions, anything but sobriety. Because sobriety meant remembering, feeling, and in his world feelings were dangerous. The streets don't offer second chances. Every move you make carries the weight of consequence. And once it hits, there's no rewind button. Friends, childhood companions, gone in an instant. Killed on nights meant for celebration. Memories captured in old videos, echoes of laughter now silenced forever. Yet in all of it, there was still love. Still a community holding on to whatever joy they could create together, midnight moments in Mobile where, for just a little while, it felt like the pain disappeared. But the truth was always waiting. Now, with time and distance, clarity begins to seep in. He's seen what the streets offer and what they take. And to the next generation, his message is simple. Stay on the porch. Don't step into a war dressed in dreams. This life is loud, but it says nothing. It promises fast money but leaves you broken, hunted, and hollow. There are other ways. Jobs, business, purpose. You don't have to rap, you don't have to hustle. If you save your money, even $8 a day, you could build a future brick by honest brick. Therapy brought him back to himself. Opening up, letting go of anger, learning that healing doesn't make you weak. That community service and anger management don't define you. They remind you that you're still here, still worth saving. His name was dragged through mud, but he never stopped believing in a better version of his life. If the opportunity comes, whether on the field, in work, or in peace, he'll take it. He's ready. There's a kind of hope that rises from rock bottom, a quiet wish that maybe, just maybe, someone's story will be heard. That someone, somewhere, will care enough to help. And in places like this, that hope is often all that's left. The streets of Mobile have their own rhythm, sharp, unforgiving, but alive with truth. Some call it chaos, others call it home. We followed the pulse into a neighborhood few outsiders ever see. Escorted by cars, eyes watching every move. There was tension in the air, yes, but something else too. Pride, survival, history written on the faces of those who lived through it. We stepped onto ground that had been transformed. The old projects, once standing tall, had been torn down, erased like a memory nobody wanted to speak about, but the people hadn't vanished. They'd simply moved, displaced but not defeated. The pain had just changed addresses, and yet, not everything was left to rot. In the heart of it all stood a corner once buried in drugs and despair, now cleaned up by those who refused to let it stay that way. Men who once walked a different path had returned, not with fear or judgment, but with love, determined to reclaim what was theirs, not just the land but the spirit. They had seen violence, they had lived in it, breathed it, survived it. Their names had become whispered warnings in the streets, labeled the biggest ops not always by what they did, but by what others feared they could do. But beneath those titles were men shaped by trauma, not evil. Men who had lost everything, homes, freedom, family. One spoke of his mother with a kind of broken reverence, a line that once crossed could never be redrawn. When death feels more familiar than peace, fear becomes a luxury few can afford, and so they walk without it, not because they're reckless, but because they've made peace with how fragile this life can be. Still, through all the hurt, there was a spark, a call for unity, an urge to stop the violence. Because when you've lived through the fire, you learn how to warn others of the smoke. This isn't just a story about crime or survival, it's a story about transformation, about neighborhoods scarred by the past, daring to imagine a future, about the strength it takes to stay standing in a world that wants you gone, and about the men who, despite the weight of it all, still believe in rebuilding what was lost. Thanks for traveling with us. Wherever you are in the world, remember, home isn't just a place, it's a perspective. We'll see you in the next story, only here on Beyond Borders. Hit subscribe, share the journey, and stay curious.